to be talking about engineering ethics because I'm chairing this reference group on engineering ethics. I was asked to chair this a year or so ago now, and it's a group jointly sponsored by the Engineering Council and the Royal Academy of Engineering, which is what you see the two logos at the top of this, the top of my slides. So I'm going to talk three things, or four things really, if you count the last. I'll talk a little bit about the group and why it was set up, and then a couple of the things that we've been thinking about and struggling with over the last year or so. One of the things is what would good look like in terms of ethics and ethical behaviour, and then I'll go into talk about some of the challenges, the awareness issues, and the opportunities that are available for us that we're working our way through as we seek to look at how to prioritize, let's say, some of the things that we might be doing as a profession. And then I'm going to finish really with, I hope, plenty of time for discussions to hear your views about how we might shape and develop the ethics of our profession across in the UK. So a little bit of context then. Two statements, relatively public statements from the Royal Academy of Engineering. It's had its position, engineering at the heart of society, as one of its key straplines, let's say. And the Engineering Council has had a number of ethics events over the years, but there was a particularly interesting address from the then CEO of the Engineering Council, a seek to create habit, custom and culture in ethics thinking of all engineers in the country. So, you know, right at the heart of what we want to do as engineering, and certainly the Royal Academy and the Engineering Council really seeing it as their role as leading the profession of engineering in the wider sense. And I'll come back to why, of course, that's an important point. And there's a previous bit of work. There's a statement of ethical principles published in 2017, again, joint between the Royal Academy and the Engineering Council. It has four tenets to it: honesty and integrity, respect for life, law, the environment and public good, accuracy and rigour in all we do, and leadership and communication. Leadership, that we showing leadership, as the Royal Academy strapline at the top says. We want to be there as part of the leading the discussions in engineering, but ethics needs to be really part of that, and communicating the complexity and subtleties of the decisions that we make. But of course, some of this has been put a little bit under pressure in recent years, and there's certainly been some very big events that have been influenced by engineering decision making. The Grenfell disaster, and of course Judith's big report, with a little bit of criticism of to some extent, engineering. Big Boeing 747 MAX problem of which was an engineering decision, an ethical engineering decision of some question. And of course, the Volkswagen diesel scandal, which was even worse than that in the sense was was in fact illegal, as well as questionable ethics. But then there are more subtle, more wide-ranging things rather than specific incidents. Climate change has lots of ethical consequences to it. Artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, bribery and corruption, the one that's been around forever, and how we address and think about these things in all the decisions that we do. And this is being exacerbated by much greater societal scrutiny on decisions that are made by everybody. And if we want engineers to be more at the heart of society and more visible, which we do, we there are likely to come under considerably more scrutiny for the decisions that we're making. And we've seen some evidence of that in these big incidents that's happened. And of course, social media, come back to this, increasingly gives even greater scope for scrutiny and discussion, let's say, not always in the best way. But it's good to know that 87% of the public see engineers as trustworthy. That's an Ipsos Mori survey from a couple of years ago. And so that's quite nice. We're right, we're not the very top, but we're very close to the top of people think that us as trustworthy, and we would like, of course, to keep it that way. Sorry, that's my telephone. How unusual for the landline to go in the middle at the best of times. So that was why we were asked to set up this engineering ethics reference group. I was asked to chair this, and this was the terms of reference that we've been given to steer the profession towards an enhanced culture of ethical behaviour, provide leadership and shape the agenda for that. But we're very much a strategic, not an operational committee, and indeed at the moment it's just thinking about how should we go forward and what might be the best way. And there is some a little bit more advice on specific priorities and emerging priorities as things change in this ethical domain and new technologies and so on come on board, but not at a specific technology level. Influence within and beyond the profession, of course, and then contribute to other related activities. There's some academy work on autonomous systems, but maybe we haven't really got. And I was asked to chair this, and we have board members from the Engineering Council, we have some nominees from the Royal Academy, but we've got some wider society from wider members from the Royal Society and Engineers Without Borders. So let me move on now to what we spent quite some time thinking about what good would look like. We've got a few statements here, and on the next slide I've got a few more practical things to it. So these are quite high-level statements. World class, we'd like our engineering profession to be world class with ethics embedded as culture such that society can maintain its confidence and trust in the engineering profession. Quite bold, but I'd be certainly interested in people's views on this. I think we might try and make that a little bit crisper in due course. But then three things under that, all in the engineering profession act with the four tenets of the ethical principles: honesty, integrity, respect for life, law, the environment, and public good, accuracy and rigor, and leadership and ability to communicate the decisions that we make in a sensible way. We would like engineers to remain among the most trusted of professionals, of course, and public trust is, and we'd like it to remain continuously high. But you see, I've added something there, and I put it in bold because public trust and awareness of the engineering profession remains continuously high, because we would really like that to be part of this. We want to be part of making those decisions, seen to be part of making those decisions, and part of the accountability of those decisions. And finally, amongst the most ethical standards in the world. That's this world-class bit that we were talking about up there. So quite high level, but what might actually that look like really in practice? And this is just the beginnings of some of the thinking that we have been talking about, and how might some of these things be made improved better. So all apprentices and students, we'd like to see exploring ethical decision making in their study and practical exercise. All practicing engineers to receive training in some way on ethical decision making. Interesting. All would feel empowered to raise concerns and challenge decisions if they felt they were unethical in some way. That doesn't necessarily mean they'd be overturned, but feel able to at least raise concerns without feeling that it's going to have some detrimental effect on their future. Of course, we'd like employers to adopt or indeed adapt the statement of ethical principles, and many have done that. There's a nice set of principles that BP has. I think there's another set in Rolls-Royce, and so on. We'd like decision-making to be open, transparent, and accountable. Unless, of course, there are defensible reasons. There might be commercial aspects, there might be national security aspects, and so on. But we'd like them to be open and transparent, particularly with members of society who are going to be impacted on by significant decisions. But we'd also like that to involve a diversity of views from within and without the organizations making those decisions. And then engineers to have a good understanding of taking those principles that I talked about before through to the standards and practice that we do, because it's easy, one thing to have high-level principles, but actually what does that mean in practice? It's not straightforward, and it requires quite a lot of discussion and debate around nuances of decision making, as I'm sure you're all aware. Think about health and safety, and indeed diversity too is, and I put there, our approach to diversity is changing, because I think it's probably still got some way to go. So those are some of the more practical elements of what good might look like, and other people might have some comments, and we'd certainly be very keen to have more. So what about these other things? I've talked about awareness, challenges and opportunities. Well, the first one, and I've mentioned some things about awareness. You know, one of the big things we'd like to raise is awareness of ethical issues, of the statement of ethical principles, of registration itself, and the codes of practice. There are many codes of practice within our professional engineering organizations. They don't need to be reproduced. But there's, you know, we need greater awareness of these codes and the debate that they should have as we make these decisions in what we do. Then there's an issue of corporate awareness and perception of the codes of practice that they might have, codes of practice of things like the ethical practice. But also about the potential sanctions that there might be, and the transparency decisions and the accountability for transparency of decisions, and then the whole issue of corporate social responsibility. So more awareness of these things, not only amongst engineers, but also within society in general. And that's the last point: societal awareness of engineers and of engineering and the decision making that we do. And we would like to hope that those decisions are transparent and can be scrutinized and defended in terms of the ethical stance that they might take, given that there are pressures at all times on the decisions that one make, from commercial and environmental and all many other areas. So what are the challenges? Well, there are many challenges. One of the reasons we set up is these things don't stay static. And as I've mentioned, you know, health and safety and diversity have changed, but societal norms do change over time, and the views on climate change and diversity in particular have certainly changed, and those things will continue to change. Technology evolving very rapidly. There's a lot on autonomous vehicles at the moment, which is rather interesting, and how that influences the way that we make the decisions and the ethical framework behind which we make them. I mentioned this issue about media, and I put here one of the challenges we have is a much greater, but often, I'm sorry to say, less informed media and societal scrutiny, enhanced by social media, of course. So how can we get out there and help to be clearer about the basis, the ethical basis of the decisions we're making? A rather difficult one that we're a long way from getting to the bottom of is that the responsibility, it's not just about individuals, it's the responsibility of decisions is often collective and organizational levels. So how does that feed into the ethical decision making that we might, that we're making? So international expectations are different sometimes across the world on many issues, particularly on ethics. Of course, one of the big challenges is the fact that the purview of registration is relatively small in terms of the volume of engineers, and yet we are all influenced, we are all affected by decisions that are made by engineers, whether or not they're registrants. So that's quite an issue that we need to be seeing this for the whole profession, but how do we influence those beyond that's the question at the end. We often think about the registration process. We're registering the title engineer, when in fact some of the decisions that we make are functional decisions, like signing off documents. A lot of other professions regulate other parts of what they do, the accountants, who can sign off accounts, for example. Health and safety is a little bit like this. Some drawings have to be signed off. So there's an issue there about the regulation of title versus function as well. How do we involve those involved in other disciplines who may have different codes or different expectations anyway? And a big challenge is, do higher education and further education teachers have the skills and experience to be able to impart and discuss the ethical decision making? So what about some opportunities? Well, I've alluded to some of them already. Engagement, we'd certainly like to maximize public engagement and awareness, and this could, we are seen as trustworthy. That is a good thing. We'd like to make sure that we keep the public on board with those decisions that we're making. Education, well, there is a challenge there, because we're just looking at how much of this is done in our higher education, further education, and there's quite a lot, but it's quite inconsistent and not very coherent. So there's be an interesting challenge there to try and get a greater purview and consistency across the education system. Professionalization, we could promote registration, of course, and then the idea about culture, fostering a culture of ethical debate. And so there's an opportunity to have much more, let's say, public or at least semi-public debate about the ethical aspects to the decisions we make, to make it clear that it's not an easy decision quite often, and there are a lot of pressures on things. So, and then some other more practical things. There's lots going on in the PEI, so professional engineering institutions, and so obviously that needs to be built on. We can compare with other professions, and we've been looking at medicine and architecture, accountancy, and so on, to see how this is done in other areas. Obviously ensure that the currency of the specific requirements of the Engineering Council for Ethics and Whistleblowing are up to date, but actually they're pretty good at the moment. More consistent education and training, and particularly sharing of good practice, and there are quite a lot of good case studies around that can be used in education and training. An idea that's come up is perhaps an oath of on graduation or on registration or wherever it might be, and the comparator has been the medical Hippocratic oath. Doctors supposedly sign up to it, so it turns out it's not quite as simple as that, but anyway. And the Canadians have a ring of iron, I think it's ring of iron, that they all or they can get on graduation as engineers. That's the Canadian Association of Engineers, whatever it's called. And then another opportunity is this point about the media, the public, the media, and policy. Guidance on the communication of ethical dimension associated with the risks and benefits of complex engineering decisions, where there is considerable uncertainty. This is, everybody, I'm afraid society does rather want certainty at the moment, and we're not going to be able to give it to them. But if we explore and discuss the complexity and nuances of these decisions, then it's rather, we believe that will raise our standard to the benefit of the profession in general. That's the public, the media, policymakers, and so on. So that's really most of what I wanted to say. I've talked about what good looks like, or what we're thinking about good looks like. What ethical behaviours would we like to be seen that are not seen now? I'd be very interested in people's views on the sorts of things that I presented, a very distilled view of our discussions, I'll tell you. But what would you think good would look like that might be different from what I've seen? There is this issue of who is responsible for what, the balance between the role of the engineer, the employer, the other stakeholders, and indeed the public, and how we make clear clearer the ethical decision-making processes and rationales behind how decisions were come to and who has roles in what. What is the experience of other professions? And how do you think we compare with other professions? Ipsos Mori thinks that, or the public seem to think that we do well, but that's in trust rather than necessarily in our ethical behavior. I'm not so sure. How might we influence non-registrants? and particularly organised as smaller companies. The big companies, you know, pretty much on board, but the smaller companies, SMEs, which is definitely the growth of employment, is a much more difficult space to influence. And how best to turn the good strides that's made by the profession. The openness to debate is much wider than it probably was many years ago, and how we can turn these strides into action, improving behaviours in all areas of the profession, and really embedding ethical behaviour in all the decisions that we make. So that's what we're trying to do as a group, to see we can come up with some sort of frameworks and recommendations and some work to help guide and steer the profession, which seems to do pretty well, but are we ready for the considerably greater scrutiny that seems to be coming our way? And with that, I will pause and allow for hand back to Gordon, to Master, and very happy to answer any questions or hear the discussion. As I said, Deborah Seddon from the Engineering Council has been supporting me on this, is here, and between us we'll certainly make some notes. But